You don't deserve to be a father when you couldn't even be a husband." The words left my mouth with a calm that shocked even me as I stood in our once shared doorway, my newborn daughter sleeping peacefully against my chest, completely unaware of the broken man begging on our porch. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Have you ever had that moment where your entire world shifts in an instant? Where everything you thought was real suddenly isn't? Mine came on what should have been the happiest day of my life. Instead, it became the day I discovered just how strong I really was. My name is Olivia Mitchell. 3 months ago, I gave birth to the most beautiful baby girl in the world, alone, while my husband of 6 years, James, was with another woman. Everyone told me I was being too harsh, that regardless of what James had done, he had rights, that our daughter needed her father. My own mother thought I would eventually come to my senses and let him back into our lives. What they didn't understand was that I wasn't acting out of anger or revenge. I was protecting my daughter from the same pain I had endured. I was breaking a cycle, and I had the law on my side. Let me take you back to where it all began. James and I met during our final year of law school. He was charismatic, ambitious, and seemed genuinely kind. We were both clerking at the same prestigious firm, both dreaming of partner track positions, both in love with the same vision of our future. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony by the lake where we'd had our first date. Everything felt perfect. Our careers were taking off, we had just bought our first home together, and we were madly in love. Or at least, I thought we were. When I found out I was pregnant, it wasn't planned, but we were ecstatic. We converted the home office into a nursery. James would read law books to my growing belly, joking that our child would be arguing precedents before kindergarten. We decided I would take a year off from the firm, then return part-time while James continued his trajectory toward partner. The pregnancy wasn't easy. Hyperemesis gravidarum had me hospitalized twice for dehydration. By my 3rd trimester, I was put on partial bed rest due to concerns about preeclampsia. Through it all, James seemed supportive, but looking back, I can see the signs I missed. The late nights at the office became more frequent. The business, trips extended by a day or two. The text messages he'd quickly hide when I entered the room. I chalked it all up to work stress and my hormonal paranoia. After all, we were both lawyers. We understood the demands of the profession. My water broke 3 weeks early. I was home alone when the first contraction hit. James was at a client dinner. I called him 6 times while timing my contractions. All went straight to voicemail. I finally called my neighbor, Elena, who rushed me to the hospital. "Don't worry," she assured me as we pulled into the emergency entrance. "We'll keep trying him. He'll make it." But he didn't. 26 hours of labor. An emergency C-section when the baby's heart rate dropped. The terrifying moment when they rushed my daughter to the NICU because she wasn't breathing properly. Through all of it, I was alone. When they finally placed my healthy baby girl in my arms 12 hours later, I felt an overwhelming wave of love and protection. I named her Maya, after my grandmother who raised me after my father abandoned us. A woman who taught me that resilience wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving in spite of those who hurt you. It wasn't until the next morning that James finally appeared, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, reeking of alcohol and cheap perfume. "I'm so sorry," he stammered, clutching a hastily purchased teddy bear. My phone died, and I fell asleep at the office. I might have believed him if Elena hadn't already shown me the truth. Unable to reach James, she had called his assistant, who admitted he had left the office early for a personal matter. Concerned, Elena had driven to our house to get my hospital bag, only to find James's car in our driveway, alongside an unfamiliar red BMW. She took pictures of both cars, time-stamped, before coming back to sit with me through labor. As James stood there lying to my face, Maya squirming in my arms, something inside me hardened. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I simply handed him my phone with Elena's photos on the screen. "Get out." His face crumpled. "Olivia, please. Get out. Now." A nurse must have noticed the tension because she appeared almost immediately, asking if everything was all right. "This man is not authorized to be in my room," I said calmly, "or near my daughter." The look of shock on James's face almost made me laugh. He had forgotten who he married, a woman who had graduated top of our class in family law, a woman who knew exactly what legal steps to take next. While he was escorted out by hospital security, I called Diane, a partner at our firm who specialized in custody cases. By the time Maya and I were discharged 3 days later, I had already filed for legal separation and an emergency temporary custody order. You see, in our state, when a child is born during marriage, the husband is automatically presumed to be the father. But that presumption can be challenged. And because James wasn't present at the birth and hadn't signed the birth certificate yet, I had a narrow window of opportunity. The judge granted the emergency custody order the same day. James was legally prohibited from approaching us without court supervision until the full hearing. I had changed the locks on our house and hired a security company to install cameras before we even came home from the hospital. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That night, as I sat in the rocking chair, feeding Maya, my phone exploded with messages. James, his parents, even some of our mutual friends, all telling me I was overreacting, that I was being cruel, that I needed to think of the baby. I turned off my phone and looked down at my daughter's perfect face. "I am thinking of you," I whispered. "Always." The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, legal paperwork, and evidence gathering. While James was busy trying to salvage his reputation at the firm, where news of his infidelity had spread like wildfire, I was building a case. It wasn't difficult. Once I started looking, the evidence was everywhere. Credit card statements, showing hotel charges, text messages recovered from our shared cloud account, and most damning of all, emails between James and his mistress, Rebecca, a paralegal from a competing firm, discussing their relationship that had apparently been going on for over a year. They had even discussed what would happen after the baby was born, how they would wait an appropriate amount of time before James would file for divorce, how they would present their relationship as having started afterward to avoid scandal. What they hadn't counted on was me finding out on the very day I gave birth, or me having the strength to fight back. 2 weeks after Maya's birth, I received a bouquet of white roses with a card begging for forgiveness. I donated them to the hospital where Maya had been born. 3 weeks after, James's mother showed up unannounced, demanding to see her grandchild. I calmly explained the restraining order included extended family until the hearing and closed the door in her face. 4 weeks after, James's lawyer, a former colleague, called with a generous offer: joint custody, liberal visitation, Substantial child support package. He's her father, Olivia, the lawyer said, his voice dripping with condescension. You can't keep them apart forever. Watch me, I replied before hanging up. By the time the full custody hearing approached, I had assembled a case that even James, with his litigation experience, couldn't easily fight. Beyond the infidelity, which unfortunately courts often consider irrelevant to parenting ability, I had evidence of James's alcohol consumption, his erratic work hours, and most importantly, his complete absence during a critical medical event for his child. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully in a conservative navy suit, my pre-pregnancy clothes finally fitting again. I styled my hair, applied subtle makeup, and fed Maya one last time before dropping her with Elena, who had become my rock through this ordeal. As I walked into the courthouse, I felt a strange sense of calm. This wasn't just about punishing James for his betrayal. This was about protecting Maya from a man who had already proven he would put his desires above his family's needs. I spotted James immediately, standing with his lawyer near the courtroom entrance. He had lost weight, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. For a brief moment, our gazes met, and I saw a flicker of the man I had once loved, regretful, desperate, broken. Then I remembered how I had called out for him during labor, how I had wept from both physical pain and heartbreak as doctors rushed my newborn away, how I had scrolled through photos of his car parked at our home while another woman waited inside. I straightened my spine and walked past him without acknowledgement. The hearing lasted 4 hours. James's lawyer painted him as a dedicated father who had made one terrible mistake, but deserved the chance to know his child. They argued the presumption of paternity, his financial stability, and his willingness to attend parenting classes and therapy. When my turn came, I didn't focus on the affair. Instead, I presented a methodical case about James's absence during a life-threatening medical emergency, his demonstrated pattern of prioritizing personal pleasure over family responsibility, and most importantly, my concerns about his judgment and trustworthiness as a co-parent. Your Honor, I concluded, this isn't about denying Mr. Mitchell access to the child. This is about ensuring that any access is structured in a way that prioritizes Maya's emotional and physical safety above all else. The judge, a woman in her 60s with shrewd eyes that missed nothing, considered both arguments carefully. Her decision wasn't everything I had hoped for, but it was close. James was granted limited visitation rights, supervised at a family center once per week for 2 hours. He was ordered to complete parenting classes, alcohol counseling, after I submitted evidence of his increased drinking, and therapy. A formal paternity test was ordered, though we all knew what it would show. Most importantly, I retained full legal and physical custody of Maya. Any major decisions about her health, education, or welfare remained solely in my hands. As we left the courtroom, James approached me despite his lawyer's attempt to hold him back. "This isn't over, Olivia," he said, voice low. "She's my daughter, too." I looked at him calmly. You should have remembered that when it mattered. That night, as I rocked Maya to sleep, I allowed myself to cry for the first time since the birth. Not for the marriage I had lost. That grief would come later, but for the relief of knowing I had protected my daughter from immediate harm. The following week, James appeared for his first supervised visitation. I arrived early, handing Maya and her diaper bag to the center supervisor before retreating to my car where I could watch the entrance without being seen. James arrived exactly on time, dressed casually but neatly, carrying a small pink stuffed rabbit He looked nervous, glancing around as if hoping to catch a glimpse of me. I sank lower in my seat, watching as he entered the building where he would meet his daughter for the first time. 2 hours later, he emerged looking shell-shocked, the way all new parents do when they first comprehend the reality of the tiny human they've helped create. There was wonder in his expression, but also profound sadness. For a brief moment, I questioned my decisions. Was I punishing him too harshly? Was I depriving Maya of a relationship she deserved? Then my phone pinged with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "He doesn't deserve either of you. You're better off without him." It was followed by a photo of James and Rebecca together, dated just yesterday. The number was blocked before I could respond, but the message was clear. Rebecca was still in the picture, despite James's tearful courtroom claims that the relationship had ended. I started the car and drove home, my resolve strengthened. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protection. About teaching Maya through my actions that we don't allow people to hurt us without consequences. That love without respect isn't love at all. 3 supervised visits later, James appeared at our door unexpectedly. Standing on the porch we had chosen together, he looked both familiar and like a complete stranger. "5 minutes, Olivia, please." "Not to see her. I know I can't. Just to talk to you." Against my better judgment, I stepped onto the porch, closing the door firmly behind me. Maya was asleep inside, the baby monitor clutched in my hand. "You're violating the court order by being here," I said quietly. "I know." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. "I'll leave if you tell me to." I just needed to say something without lawyers or judges or supervisors watching. I crossed my arms. "I'm listening. I messed up. Worse than messed up. I destroyed everything good in my life because I was selfish and stupid and scared of how much being a father would change things." "Is that supposed to be an excuse?" "No." He shook his head vehemently. "There is no excuse. I'm just trying to explain, not justify. The affair with Rebecca, it wasn't about love. It was about escaping responsibility. When you got pregnant, I panicked. I wasn't ready to put someone else before myself." I laughed bitterly. "And you think that makes you sound like father material?" "No. It makes me sound exactly like what I am. A man who made the biggest mistake of his life and lost everything that matters." His voice broke. "I don't deserve forgiveness, Olivia. I don't even deserve the visitation the court granted me. But Maya deserves better than a part-time, supervised father figure." "You should have thought of that before." "I know, but I'm thinking of it now. Every minute of every day." He pulled an envelope from his pocket. "I've been offered a position at the Boston office. I'm going to take it." I stared at him, confused. "You're leaving?" "I'm giving you space. I'm going to follow every court order to the letter. Take all the classes, do all the therapy, prove to you over time that I can be the father Maya deserves." "Why tell me this?" "Because I want you to know this isn't a game to me. I'm not going to drag you back to court every 3 months trying to get more time or less supervision. I'm going to earn your trust back, one supervised visit at a time, no matter how long it takes." I wanted to believe him. Part of me, the part that remembered the man I'd fallen in love with, wanted to throw open the door and let him see Maya sleeping peacefully in her crib. But the stronger part, the mother part, knew better. "You don't deserve to be a father? When you couldn't even be a husband. I said, the words flowing with a calm that surprised even me. He flinched as though I'd struck him, but nodded slowly. You're right. I have to earn that title back. As he turned to leave, I found myself calling after him. James. He paused, hope flashing across his face. I don't hate you, I said softly. I just don't trust you anymore. And Maya needs a parent she can trust completely. I know. His eyes were wet. I'll become that person, Olivia. For her. Even if you never let me back into your life, I'll become someone worthy of being her. Other. After he drove away, I stood on the porch for a long time, watching the stars appear one by one in the twilight sky. The baby monitor crackled with Maya's soft breathing, grounding me in the present moment. The truth was, I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if James would follow through on his promises, or if time would heal the wounds of his betrayal. I didn't know if Maya would grow up with her father as a meaningful presence in her life, or just a name on legal documents. What I did know was this. I had survived the most painful experience of my life. I had brought a child into the world alone, faced the betrayal of the person I trusted most, and emerged stronger for it. As I went back inside and checked on my sleeping daughter, I realized something profound. In trying to protect Maya, I had also protected myself. I had rediscovered the woman I was before James, independent, resilient, and unwilling to settle for less than I deserved. That night, I wrote in the journal I'd been keeping for Maya since learning I was pregnant. Your father wasn't there when you took your first breath, but I was. He wasn't there when you spent your first night in the NICU, but I was. He has missed these precious early weeks of your life, and that's his loss to bear. I don't know what role he will play in your future. That depends on choices he has yet to make, on trust he has yet to rebuild. But know this, my darling girl, you will never have to wonder about my love or my presence in your life. I will always put you first. Always. And someday, when you're old enough to understand, I will tell you why I fought so hard to protect you. Not because I wanted to keep you from your father, but because I wanted to ensure that the father in your life would be worthy of you. I closed the journal and placed it in the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, alongside the photos from the hospital, the tiny hat Maya had worn home, and the court documents granting me custody. These weren't just mementos, they were proof of my strength. Evidence that when life had thrown me its cruelest curveball, I hadn't just survived, I had fought back. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. James's first supervised visit since our porch conversation. My return to work part-time. The continuing legal process of our divorce. But for tonight, in this quiet house with my daughter sleeping peacefully, I had found something I thought I'd lost forever. Peace. Not the naive peace of my marriage, but something stronger, the hard-won serenity that comes from standing your ground and protecting what matters most. I checked the baby monitor one more time, then crawled into bed, exhausted but resolute. Whatever tomorrow brought, I would face it with the same determination that had carried me this far. Because I wasn't just Maya's mother. I was her protector, her advocate, her safe harbor in a world of uncertainty. And I wasn't going to let anyone, not even her father, compromise that sacred trust. Soft transition from prior scene, camera pans over a desk with legal documents and a framed photo of baby Maya. Rebuilding your life after betrayal isn't a straight line. It's more like climbing a mountain during an earthquake, just when you Think you found solid footing. The ground shifts again. The Monday after James told me he was moving to Boston, I returned to work part-time at the law firm. Walking through those familiar glass doors felt surreal, like stepping into a previous life. My office was exactly as I'd left it 4 months ago. Case files stacked neatly, law books aligned on shelves, the Harvard law diploma hanging beside my bar certification. But I was different. Fundamentally changed. Olivia, welcome back. Diana, the senior partner who had helped with my custody case, embraced me warmly. How's motherhood treating you? Sleep is a distant memory, I admitted with a smile, but worth every exhausted moment. We didn't discuss James directly. We didn't have to. The firm had made their position clear by keeping me on while quietly transferring him to the Boston office. It wasn't just professional courtesy. His affair with a paralegal from a competing firm had created potential conflict of interest issues that reflected poorly on everyone. Diana squeezed my arm gently. The Henderson case is waiting on your desk. Nothing urgent, but whenever you're ready. Nodding my thanks, I settled into my ergonomic chair and ran my fingers over the keyboard. For 6 years, this had been the epicenter of my identity. Olivia Mitchell, rising star attorney. Now that identity had expanded, but not diminished as I'd feared during pregnancy. If anything, motherhood had sharpened my focus, clarified my values, strengthened my resolve. I opened my laptop and began reviewing the Henderson file, sliding back into legal terminology and case precedents with surprising ease. By lunchtime, I had drafted a preliminary response and scheduled meetings with 3 clients. The familiar rhythm of work was comforting, grounding me when so much else in my life remained in flux. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena, who was watching Maya. Little Miss Sunshine just had a bottle and is napping like a champion. All good here. I smiled, feeling the now familiar tug between professional fulfillment and maternal longing. I wanted to be excelling in this office, but I also wanted to be holding my daughter. The complexity of these simultaneous truths was something no one had fully prepared me for. That evening, after collecting Maya and thanking Elena profusely, I sat in our living room nursing my daughter while reviewing case notes. The house felt different now, no longer haunted by James's betrayal, but reclaimed as our sanctuary. I had redecorated, replacing the masculine leather sofa with a more comfortable sectional, swapping dark artwork for bright, hopeful pieces, and converting James's home office into a playroom for Maya's future. As Maya drifted to sleep in my arms, my phone lit up with an unfamiliar Boston number. Hello? I answered cautiously. Olivia. James's voice sounded distant, formal. I'm sorry to call like this. I wanted to confirm I'll be back for the supervised visitation this weekend. I tensed involuntarily. The court order requires you to communicate through the family center for scheduling. I know. I already confirmed with them. He hesitated. I wanted to make sure you knew I was coming, that I'm taking this seriously. Part of me wanted to hang up, to maintain the strictly legal boundaries I'd established. But another part recognized this might be his clumsy attempt at rebuilding trust. I appreciate the heads up, I said finally. Maya and I will be there. How is she? The raw longing in his voice caught me off guard. I glanced down at our sleeping daughter, her dark lashes resting against plump cheeks, her tiny hand curled around my finger. She had James's chin, his deep-set eyes. Denying that connection felt suddenly petty. She's thriving, I said softly. Growing fast. starting to track movements with her eyes. The pediatrician says she's developing perfectly. His exhale was shaky. Thank you for telling me that. After we hung up, I sat for a long time in the quiet living room, Maya's steady breathing a counterpoint to my racing thoughts. Was I doing the right thing maintaining such rigid boundaries? Was I letting my hurt overshadow what might be best for Maya in the long term? I had no easy answers, only the commitment to keep asking the questions. Saturday arrived with a mixture of dread and determination. I dressed Maya in a pale yellow outfit, neutral, nothing that could be interpreted as me trying to make a statement or manipulate the situation. I packed her diaper bag meticulously, included detailed notes about her feeding schedule, and drove to the family center with my heart pounding against my ribs. The supervisor, a kind-eyed woman named Rhonda, met us at the entrance. "Remember, you don't have to stay," she reminded me gently. Many mothers find it easier to drop off and return in 2 hours. But I couldn't bring myself to leave. Not yet. Not until I'd seen with my own eyes how James interacted with Maya. So I sat in an adjacent observation room, watching through one-way glass as James entered the visitation space. He looked nervous, more tentative than the confident litigator I'd married. When Rhonda placed Maya in his arms, his expression transformed into one of absolute wonder. "Hi there, little one," he whispered, voice catching. "I'm your dad." Maya stared up at him with her solemn newborn gaze, neither crying nor cuddling, simply observing this unfamiliar face. James sat carefully in the rocking chair, supporting her head exactly as Rhonda demonstrated, and began speaking to her in soft, measured tones. He told her about Boston, about the small apartment he'd rented near the harbor, about the children's books he'd already bought for someday. He apologized repeatedly for missing her birth, for the chaos of these early weeks, for not being the father she deserved from the start. "But I'm going to do better," he promised. "Even if it takes years. Even if your mom never forgives me. I'm going to become someone you can count on." I hadn't expected this, the raw vulnerability, the absence of performance or manipulation. James wasn't playing to the supervisor or trying to build a case for expanded visitation. He was simply connecting with his daughter, one human to another, with no audience in mind. When Maya began fussing toward the end of the visit, James didn't panic or immediately hand her back. Instead, he calmly checked her diaper, tried the pacifier techniques Rhonda suggested, and gently rocked her until she settled. The competence surprised me, though it shouldn't have. He had apparently been taking the parenting classes seriously. As I drove home afterward, Maya sleeping peacefully in her car seat, conflicting emotions swirled through me. Relief that James seemed genuinely invested in developing a relationship with our daughter, lingering anger that he had missed so many critical moments already. Fear about what his continuing presence in our lives might mean. And beneath it all, a whisper of something dangerously close to nostalgia for the partnership we'd once shared. That evening, I called my best friend Zoe, who had been my rock throughout this ordeal despite living 3 states away. He looked different, I admitted after recounting the visitation. Not just saying the right things, but actually changed somehow. "People can change," Zoe said carefully. "Not always, not completely, but sometimes a massive wake-up call. Like this can trigger genuine transformation. The question is whether you can ever trust that change." "That's just it," I sighed. "I don't know if I can, or if I even want to try." "You don't have to decide today," she reminded me. Or tomorrow, or next month. You have time to see if his actions match his words consistently. But what about Maya? Am I denying her something vital by keeping such tight restrictions on their relationship? Zoe was quiet for a moment. Maya needs stability and love more than anything else right now. You're providing both. If James proves himself trustworthy over time, you can always reassess the boundaries. Her words settled something within me. This wasn't about making permanent, irrevocable decisions. It was about creating a safe structure where trust might, gradually, cautiously, be rebuilt. The following week, I received formal notice that James had completed the court-mandated parenting classes, well ahead of schedule. The week after that, his lawyer submitted documentation of his enrollment in both individual therapy and an alcohol management program, though the court had only required one or the other. I could have dismissed these as calculated moves to improve his legal standing, but something told me there was more to it. The James I had married was not one to humble himself unnecessarily or exceed expectations when meeting minimum requirements. Would suffice. At our next scheduled court check-in, I made a small but significant concession. Your Honor, while I maintain that supervised visitation remains in Maya's best interest at this time, I would be amenable to increasing the frequency from once weekly to twice weekly, provided it doesn't interfere with her routine. James's lawyer looked stunned. James himself sat perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter this fragile moment of progress. The judge nodded approvingly. That seems reasonable, Ms. Mitchell. The court appreciates your willingness to facilitate this relationship, despite the difficult circumstances. Outside the courtroom, James approached cautiously, his lawyer hovering protectively nearby. Thank you, he said simply. You didn't have to do that. I didn't do it for you, I replied, adjusting Maya in her carrier. I did it because it's the right thing for her. If you're truly committed to being consistently present in her life. I am. His gaze dropped to Maya, who was watching him with curious eyes. More than anything. I nodded once, then turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. Olivia, the paternity test results came back. I froze. Of course they had. It had been a formality, ordered by the court despite no one questioning Maya's parentage. And? I asked, not turning around. 99. 9% match, obviously. His voice softened. She has my grandmother's eyes. The observation, so personal, so specific, caught me off guard. I looked back at him over my shoulder. Yes, I acknowledged. She does. Something passed between us then. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but perhaps the first molecule of oxygen to a flame that had been extinguished. The recognition that regardless of our broken marriage, we had created something perfect together. As spring turned to summer, a new rhythm emerged. James visited Maya twice weekly at the family center, never missing a session despite the commute from Boston. The supervised reports were consistently positive, noting his growing confidence with infant care and his respectful adherence to all guidelines. We began exchanging brief texts about Maya's development. Nothing personal, just updates a co-parent would want to know. Her first real smile, the pediatrician confirming she was in the 80th percentile for height. The way she had started cooing in response to certain books. Then came the day I arrived to pick up Maya and found her laughing. A full, genuine baby chuckle that I had never heard before. James was making silly faces, completely focused on her delight, oblivious to my arrival until Rhonda quietly announced my presence. She laughed, he said, looking up at me with an expression of such pure joy that for a moment I forgot to maintain my emotional distance. I didn't know she could laugh yet. That's the first time, I admitted, moving closer, to witness Maya's newfound skill. She hasn't done that at home yet. The milestone hung between us, a precious first that should have been shared, now experienced separately through the sterile confines of supervised visitation. James carefully transferred Maya to my arms, his fingers brushing mine in the process. The brief contact sent an unwelcome surge of familiarity through me, a muscle memory of intimacy I had worked hard to forget. "I've been meaning to ask," he said, stepping back immediately as if sensing my discomfort. "Her 6-month checkup is coming up. I know I don't have medical decision rights, but I wondered if I could get a copy of the doctor's report afterward." The request was reasonable, appropriate even, but it represented a shift, from the rigid legal minimum to something more collaborative. "I'll email you the summary," I agreed, surprised by my own willingness to extend this small olive branch. His grateful smile reminded me of earlier days, before pregnancy, before betrayal, when we had been partners in the truest sense of the word. The memory ached like pressing on a healing bruise, painful but no longer debilitating. That night, after putting Maya to bed, I pulled out the journal I'd been keeping for her. I hadn't written in it since that first emotional entry months ago, but suddenly I felt compelled to document this transitional moment. "Today you laughed for the first time, a real joyful laugh that lit up your entire face. Your father was the one who coaxed this new sound from you. As much as part of me wished I had been the first to hear it, there was something right about him sharing in this milestone. I don't know what your relationship with him will look like as you grow. I don't know if he will maintain this commitment to being present, or if old patterns will eventually resurface. But I do know this. I will never stand in the way of a healthy connection between you two, even as I continue to protect you from potential hurt. The world isn't black and white, my sweet girl. People aren't simply good or bad, trustworthy or untrustworthy. We are all complex, flawed, and capable of both tremendous growth and disappointing backsliding. Your father betrayed my trust in the most painful way possible, but that doesn't mean he can't be a good father to you. My job is to navigate these gray areas with wisdom and discernment, always keeping your well-being at the center of every decision." I closed the journal, feeling a subtle shift in my perspective. The rigid anger that had propelled me through those early weeks had mellowed into something more nuanced. Not forgiveness exactly, but a willingness to acknowledge complexity. To see James as neither villain nor victim, but as a deeply flawed human being attempting redemption. When Maya turned 6 months old, I did something unprecedented. After her pediatric checkup confirmed her perfect health and development, I texted James not just the clinical summary, but also a recent photo of her sitting up unassisted, grinning toothlessly at the camera. His response came immediately. "She's incredible. Thank you for sharing this." Then, after a moment, "Would it be possible to talk about potentially moving toward unsupervised visits in the future? No pressure, just something to consider when you feel it might be appropriate." The request wasn't unexpected. The supervision reports had been consistently positive for months. James had maintained sobriety, continued therapy, and demonstrated genuine parenting skills. The court would likely support a gradual transition to unsupervised visitation if he petitioned for it. But he hadn't petitioned. He had asked me directly, respectfully, without legal pressure or manipulation. The approach itself represented growth, a recognition of my authority as Maya's primary parent and decision-maker. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I spent several days observing Maya during her visits with James, consulting with Rhonda about her professional assessment, and reflecting on my own reservations. Was I still withholding trust as punishment for his betrayal? Or did I have legitimate concerns about his reliability? Was I protecting Maya or my own wounded heart? The answers weren't simple, but the direction became clearer. If James had truly changed, and all evidence suggested he had, then Maya deserved the chance to develop a more natural relationship with her father, outside the artificial constraints of supervised visits. Let's discuss a transition plan, I finally replied. Maybe starting with shorter, unsupervised visits at the family center, then progressing from there if all goes well. His response was measured, mature. I appreciate your willingness to consider this. Whatever timeline feels comfortable for you and best for Maya is fine with me. We arranged to meet. Our first real conversation outside court or the family center since that night on the porch. I suggested a coffee shop near my office, neutral territory with the built-in time constraint of my lunch break. James arrived. Early, already seated with a cup of tea when I walked in. He stood immediately, uncertainty written across his features. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, waiting until I sat before resuming his seat. "How is she today?" "Teething," I replied, placing my purse on an empty chair. "Which means fussy and clingy and absolutely exhausted but refusing to nap." He smiled sympathetically. "The books say frozen washcloths can help." "They can, when she doesn't throw them across the room." I found myself returning his smile before remembering why we were here. "About the visits." "Before we get into that," he interrupted gently, "there's something I need to say." I braced myself, half expecting the conversation to devolve into emotional territory I wasn't prepared to navigate. "I want to thank you," he continued, surprising me. "You would have been fully justified in fighting every attempt I made to be in Maya's life after what I did. You had the legal grounds and the moral high ground, but instead you've been fair. Strict, but fair. You've placed Maya's needs above your own hurt, and I respect that enormously." The acknowledgement caught me off guard. For so long, I had cast myself as the lone protector, the only one truly focused on Maya's welfare. Hearing James recognize my efforts, and implicitly his own failures, shifted something fundamental between us. "I'm trying to do right by her," I said simply. "That's all any of us can do." He nodded, eyes somber. "I know I can't undo the past. I can't erase missing her birth or the pain I caused. But I can commit to being the father she deserves moving forward, to earning back trust day by day. That's why I'm willing to discuss unsupervised visitation," I admitted. "Because you've shown consistency these past months. You've put in the work without shortcuts or complaints." Relief washed over his features. "Thank you. That means more than you know." We spent the next half hour outlining a gradual transition plan. First, unsupervised time within the family center. Then, if that went well for a month, short outings to nearby parks or child-friendly cafes. Eventually, if all these steps proceeded without issue, potentially longer visits at James's Boston apartment once it was properly child-proofed and inspected. As we finalized the details, James hesitated, then asked, "How are you, Olivia? Not just as Maya's mom, but..." You. Are you doing okay? The personal question, delivered with genuine concern rather than obligation, pierced through my carefully maintained professional demeanor. How was I? No one had really asked that in months. Everyone focused on Maya, on the logistics of single parenthood, on the legal proceedings, but rarely on my emotional well-being. I searched for the right words. I'm finding my way. Some days are harder than others, but I'm stronger than I knew. He nodded, a flash of regret crossing his features. You always were the strongest person I knew. I just forgot to appreciate that. As we parted ways outside the coffee shop, James didn't try to hug me or make any physical contact. Instead, he simply said, I meant what I said, you know. About becoming someone worthy of being her father, of being in your life, even if just as a co-parent you can respect. I studied him in the autumn sunlight, this man who had been my partner, my betrayer, and now something undefined, not quite friend, more than mere legal adversary. I believe you're trying, I said honestly. That's a start. Walking back to my office, I realized that the crushing weight of anger I had carried for so long had lightened imperceptibly. Not gone, perhaps it never would be completely, but transformed into something I could carry without being defined by it. Maya deserved parents who could communicate without bitterness, who could put her needs above their own wounded history, who could model healthy boundaries and mutual respect, even if they couldn't model a loving marriage. That evening, as I rocked Maya to sleep, singing softly about mockingbirds and diamond rings, I understood that true strength wasn't in maintaining walls, but in knowing when to cautiously, selectively lower them. Not for James, not even for myself, but for the sleeping child in my arms, who deserved the best possible version of both her parents, separately or eventually, perhaps, in some form of respectful collaboration. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust, once shattered, doesn't mend overnight. But as Maya's tiny fingers curled around mine in sleep, I made a silent promise to keep moving forward, one small step at a time, toward whatever future would bring her the greatest happiness and security. Because in the end, that's what this had always been about. Not punishment or vindication, but protection and love in its purest, most selfless form. Camera opens on Maya's first birthday party decorations being set up. They say time heals all wounds. What they don't tell you is that healing doesn't mean returning to who you were before. It means becoming someone new, someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than you ever imagined possible. As I hung streamers for Maya's first birthday party, this truth resonated deeply within me. 1 year. 365 days of navigating motherhood, rebuilding my career, and carefully reconstructing my understanding of family. The journey had transformed me in ways I never anticipated. The unicorn banner looks crooked. My mother called from across the living room, standing back to assess my handiwork with critical eyes. I adjusted the glittering Happy Birthday Maya sign with a patient smile. Mom had flown in 3 days ago from Arizona, eager to help with party preparations, but bringing her unique blend of support and subtle criticism. Have you heard from James? She asked, trying to sound casual while arranging cupcakes on a tiered stand. He's driving down from Boston this morning, I replied, securing the banner with another thumbtack. He's staying at the Marriott downtown. Mom nodded, her feelings about James's inclusion in the celebration evident in her tight smile. She had been my fiercest defender after the birth, ready to wage war against him on my behalf. My gradual steps toward constructive co-parenting confused her, though she tried to respect my decisions. "Just remember," she said, placing a perfect pink rosette on the final cupcake, "you don't owe him anything." I climbed down from the stepladder, surveying the transformed living room with satisfaction. "This isn't about owing, Mom. It's about Maya having both parents celebrate her milestone." The past 6 months had seen careful progress in James's relationship with our daughter. After 3 months of increasingly longer unsupervised visits, at the family center, the court had approved weekend daytime outings. James would pick Maya up on Saturday mornings, take her to age-appropriate activities, and return her by early evening. To my surprise, he documented these outings meticulously, not just with photos, which he always shared, but with detailed notes about her responses, preferences, and development. It was as if he was building his own understanding of our daughter piece by precious piece, determined not to miss another moment of her growth. The doorbell rang at precisely 11 a.m., an hour before the other guests were scheduled to arrive. James, punctual as always. "I'll get it," my mother offered, but I shook my head. "It's okay, Mom. Can you check if Maya's awake from her nap?" She hesitated, then nodded, disappearing down the hallway toward the nursery while I opened the front door. James stood on the porch holding an elaborately wrapped package and a smaller gift bag. He had trimmed his hair since I'd last seen him 2 weeks ago, and the dark circles that had been his constant companion in the early months of our separation had faded. "Hi," he said, shifting awkwardly. "Is it still okay that I came early to help set up?" I stepped aside to let him in. "Of course. Mom and I have most of it handled, but we could use help with the photo backdrop." He followed me into the living room, taking in the decorations with visible appreciation. "This looks amazing, Olivia. The unicorn theme is perfect." "Magical creatures for our magical girl," I said, the phrase slipping out before I realized it was one we'd coined together during my pregnancy, back when we were still planning a shared future. A shadow of recognition crossed his face, but he didn't comment on it. Instead, he placed the presents on the designated table and rolled up his sleeves. "Where do you want the backdrop?" We worked together efficiently, falling into the rhythm of cooperation that had once been the foundation of our relationship. James hung the shimmery curtain while I arranged props and a small throne-like chair for Maya. We discussed logistics, party games, and the schedule, all safe, neutral topics centered on our daughter's special day. "She's awake." My mother's voice preceded her into the room, followed by Maya in her arms, sleep-tousled and adorable in her unicorn print pajamas. The moment she spotted James, her face lit up. "Dada!" she squealed, extending her arms toward him. The simple word, one of only 5 in her growing vocabulary, transformed James's expression. Pure joy radiated from him as he approached carefully, aware of my mother's protective stance. "Happy birthday, Princess," he said, his voice thick with emotion as my mother reluctantly transferred Maya to his arms. "Do you know you're 1 whole year old today?" Maya patted his face in response, babbling excitedly. The easy affection between them still surprised me sometimes. This natural bond that had developed despite all the barriers and restrictions I had initially placed around their relationship. My mother caught my eye over James's shoulder, her expression a complicated mix of concern and reluctant acceptance. I gave her a reassuring nod. This was how it needed to be. Maya surrounded by people who loved her, regardless of the complex history between them. "I should get her dressed," I said, moving forward to reclaim my daughter. Guests will start arriving soon. James handed Maya over carefully. Of course. What can I do to help? The high chair needs to be decorated, my mother interjected, apparently deciding that if James was going to be here, he might as well be useful. Streamers and a special birthday banner. Everything's on the dining table. I'm on it, he replied, with unexpected enthusiasm, seemingly grateful for the assignment. As I carried Maya to her room to dress her in the special outfit I'd chosen, a frilly white dress with a unicorn headband, I caught myself smiling at the unlikely domestic scene unfolding in my living room. James and my mother working together, focused on a common goal, making Maya's day special. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this scenario. In those raw, painful weeks after Maya's birth, the future had seemed like an endless battlefield, with James and me eternally positioned as adversaries. Now we had found this fragile equilibrium, not friendship, not reconciliation, but a functional partnership built around Maya's well-being. The party itself was a whirlwind of baby giggles, cake smearing, and the delighted chaos of half a dozen one-year-olds exploring my living room. I watched James navigate the social dynamics with careful respect for boundaries, friendly but not presumptuous, helpful but never overstepping. When it came time for cake, we stood on either side of Maya's decorated high chair as everyone sang, "Happy Birthday." In that moment, catching James's eye across our daughter's beaming face, I felt a surprising serenity. This wasn't the family configuration I had envisioned, but it was ours nonetheless, shaped by painful truths, hard-won wisdom, and the transformative power of putting Maya first. After the last guest departed, James lingered, helping with cleanup. Despite my assurances it wasn't necessary, Maya had crashed from her sugar high and was napping in her room, surrounded by new toys and the crumpled remains of wrapping paper. "Thank you," James said quietly as he gathered discarded cups from the coffee table, "for letting me be part of today." I looked up from where I was sorting salvageable decorations. "You're her father. She deserves to have you celebrate her milestones." He nodded, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his features. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something." My guard instantly rose. Whenever those words preceded a conversation, complicated feelings typically followed. "The Boston position was always temporary," he continued, setting down the trash bag. "A one-year placement to help establish the new office. That year is almost up." I focused on folding a paper tablecloth, keeping my expression neutral. "Are they extending your contract?" "They've offered to, but I've also received an offer from Harrington and Walsh here in the city." He paused. "I'm considering moving back." The news shouldn't have affected me so strongly. It was logical, even expected, that James would want to live closer to Maya. The 2-hour drive from Boston had made regular visitation challenging, especially during winter months. Still, the prospect of him returning permanently to our city, our community, stirred complicated emotions. "I wanted to discuss it with you first," he added quickly. "The last thing I want is for you to feel like I'm invading your space or trying to pressure you for more time with Maya. If you're uncomfortable with me moving back, I'll stay in Boston." The consideration behind this statement, so different from the James who had made unilateral decisions during our marriage, caught me off guard. He was actually prioritizing my comfort, willing to maintain the status quo if that's what I preferred. "Maya would benefit from having you closer," I said finally, meeting his gaze. "Especially as she gets older and schedules become more complicated with school and activities. I wouldn't object to you moving back." Relief washed over his face. Thank you. I promise I'll maintain all the same boundaries. This isn't about trying to change our arrangement. It's just about being more available for her. I nodded, appreciating his clarity. I know. As he gathered his coat to leave, he hesitated by the door. The court review is coming up next month. I was thinking. He trailed off, then started. Again. I was wondering if you'd consider revising the custody agreement. Not dramatically, but maybe adding an overnight visit every other weekend? The request was reasonable, even conservative given Maya's clear attachment to him and his consistent reliability over the past year. The court would likely approve much more expansive access if he pushed for it. Yet he was approaching me directly, respectfully seeking my input rather than leveraging legal pressure. Let me think about it, I replied, neither committing nor refusing outright. We can discuss the details before the hearing. He accepted this with a nod. Of course. Take all the time you need. After he left, I sank onto the sofa, emotionally drained but strangely peaceful. My mother emerged from the kitchen where she'd been tactfully giving us privacy. He's really changed, hasn't he? She observed, sitting beside me. I leaned my head against her shoulder, grateful for her steady presence. He has. Or maybe he's becoming who he always could have been if he'd been ready to put someone else first. Does that change how you feel about what happened? I considered the question carefully. It doesn't erase it. Nothing could. But it does affect how I think about the future. Maya's future, specifically. She deserves the best possible relationship. With both her parents. Mom squeezed my hand. You've handled this with more grace than most people could manage, sweetheart. I'm proud of you. Later that night, after Maya was tucked into bed surrounded by her new stuffed animals, I found myself looking through photos from the day. There was one that my friend Zoe had captured without my knowledge. A candid moment where James and I were both laughing at Maya's delighted reaction to cake. We weren't looking at each other, both completely focused on our daughter. But there was an unmistakable harmony in the image. Co-parents united in joy over the little person we had created together. I saved the photo to my phone, then opened the journal I kept for Maya. It had been months since my last entry, life having grown too busy for consistent documentation. Today you turned 1 year old, my brave, beautiful girl, I wrote. Your party was filled with love from family and friends who adore you. Your father and I stood together as you smashed your cake and opened presents. It wasn't the family picture I once imagined, but it was perfect in its own way. The past year has taught me that family isn't always what we expect. Sometimes it breaks apart only to reshape itself into something different, but still meaningful. Your father and I aren't together romantically, but we are forever connected through you. And we are both committed to ensuring you grow up surrounded by love, respect, and security. You'll have questions someday about why we separated. Why your early baby photos show me alone with you. Why there was a time when your father had to visit you under supervision. When that day comes, I promise to tell you the truth, but also to help you understand that people can make terrible mistakes and still find redemption through genuine effort and change. Your father missed your birth, but he has fought to be present for every moment since he realized what truly matters. He has earned my respect, if not my complete trust. More importantly, he has earned his place in your life, not through legal rights, but through consistent love and commitment. As you grow, I hope you'll learn from both of us, from my resilience and from his journey toward becoming the father you deserve. May you inherit my strength and his determination to make amends. May you understand that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it can mean finding a new path forward. I closed the journal, feeling a sense of closure I hadn't expected. The rage and betrayal that had once consumed me had gradually transformed into something else, not absolution or amnesia, but a measured acceptance that allowed space for Maya's relationship with her father without compromising my own boundaries and truth. The following month brought James's return to the city. He found an apartment about 20 minutes from our house, close enough for convenient visits, but not so near that it felt intrusive. True to his word, he maintained all the established protocols, never showing up unannounced or pressuring for extra time. At the court review, I surprised both our lawyers by proposing a revised agreement that included not only the overnight visits James had requested, but also specific holiday arrangements that gave him meaningful time with Maya during special occasions. "Are you sure about this?" my lawyer whispered as the judge reviewed the proposal. "We could maintain much stricter limitations if you preferred." "I'm sure," I replied firmly. "He's proven himself consistent and committed. Maya deserves this relationship with her father." The judge approved our agreement, commending both of us for putting our child's needs above personal grievances. As we left the courtroom, James approached cautiously. "Thank you," he said simply. "I know that wasn't easy." I adjusted my bag on my shoulder. "Actually, it was easier than I expected. Maya lights up when she sees you. That matters more than our history." We walked toward the elevator in companionable silence. No longer adversaries, but not quite friends. Something in between that didn't have a simple label. "The first overnight visit is this Saturday," he said as the elevator doors opened. "Is there anything special I should know about her bedtime routine?" The question was so earnest, so focused on Maya's comfort rather than his convenience, that I made a spontaneous decision. "Why don't you come over Friday evening and observe her routine? That way you'll see exactly how we do things." Surprise flickered across his face. "You'd be comfortable with that?" "It's for Maya," I said with a slight shrug, "to make the transition easier for her." But as I drove home, I recognized it was also a small step toward normalized co-parenting, the kind that prioritized practical cooperation over rigid boundaries when appropriate, the kind that might actually serve as a healthy model for Maya as she grew old enough to understand her family dynamics. That Friday evening unfolded more naturally than I had anticipated. James arrived with a notebook, prepared to document Maya's routine in detail. I found his dedication both touching and slightly amusing. "You don't need to take actual notes," I said as I prepared Maya's dinner. "Just watch and ask questions." He put the notebook aside sheepishly. "Sorry, lawyer habits die hard. I just don't want to mess this up." "You won't," I assured him, surprised by my own confidence in his abilities. "You've been handling daytime visits beautifully for months. This is just longer." We moved through Maya's evening routine together. Dinner, bath time, stories, lullabies. James observed attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions or offering to help. Maya, delighted by the novel experience of having both parents present, was more rambunctious than usual, turning simple tasks into games. "She's showing off for you," I explained as Maya performed her newest trick, spinning in circles until she fell down giggling. "She's usually calmer at bedtime." "I don't mind," James laughed, catching Maya as she wobbled dizzily toward him. "This is the good stuff." The simple phrase carried unexpected weight. This is the good stuff. The everyday moments of parenthood that he had started to miss from her earliest days. The small rituals and routines that formed the foundation of security and love. The stuff that mattered more than career ambitions or external validation. After Maya finally settled into sleep, James and I found ourselves in the kitchen, awkwardly navigating the unfamiliar territory of casual conversation without our daughter as focus. "Can I ask you something?" he said suddenly, leaning against the counter while I rinsed Maya's dinner dishes. "Something personal?" I tensed slightly, but nodded. "Go ahead." "Are you happy? Not just managing or functioning, but actually happy?" The question caught me off guard with its directness and genuine concern. I turned off the water, considering my answer carefully. "Most days, yes," I said finally. Not in the way I once expected to be, but in a deeper way I hadn't anticipated. Maya brings incredible joy. My work feels more meaningful. I've rebuilt relationships with friends I neglected during our marriage. And I've discovered strengths in myself I never knew existed. He nodded thoughtfully. "You seem centered, more yourself somehow." "Betrayal has a way of stripping away pretense," I replied without bitterness. "When your world falls apart, you discover what's truly essential." "I wish I had recognized what was essential before I destroyed everything," he said quietly. "But I'm grateful every day that you've allowed me to remain in Maya's life despite what I did." The raw honesty between us felt both foreign and familiar, reminiscent of our early relationship before ambition and insecurity complicated our connection. "I didn't do it for you," I reminded him gently. "I did it for her, and for myself in a way. Holding on to anger requires too much energy I'd rather invest in building something positive." "Still," he said, "thank you for being bigger than my mistake, for seeing that people can change." As he prepared to leave, gathering notes about Maya's favorite stuffed animals and specific bedtime song preferences, I found myself reflecting on our journey. From the devastation of betrayal during my most vulnerable moment to this careful, respectful co-parenting relationship, the path had been neither straight nor easy, but we had arrived at a place I could never have imagined in those dark early days. "You're going to do great tomorrow," I told him at the door. "Maya is lucky to have a father who tries this hard." He smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "She's luckier to have you as her mother, someone who shows her daily what resilience and grace look like." After he left, I stood on the porch for a long moment, watching the spring stars emerge in the darkening sky. The woman I had been 2 years ago, ambitious, naive, certain of her future, would never have recognized the life I now led. Single motherhood, carefully negotiated co-parenting, a career recalibrated to accommodate new priorities. Yet as I returned to the quiet house, checking on Maya one last time before settling onto the couch with case files I needed to review, I realized something profound. I wouldn't trade this hard-won wisdom for the comfortable illusions of my previous life. The betrayal that had nearly broken me had ultimately revealed my true capacity for strength, forgiveness, and love beyond conditions. It had taught me that family could be redefined, that boundaries could be both firm and compassionate, that moving forward didn't require forgetting the past, but rather integrating its lessons into a more authentic future. As I prepared for Maya's first overnight with her father, packing her favorite pajamas, comfort items, and detailed instructions, I felt not anxiety, but a quiet confidence. Not because I trusted James completely, but because I trusted myself completely. I had created a structure where Maya could benefit from both parents' love, while I maintained the self-respect and boundaries essential to my well-being. "We're going to be okay," I whispered to Maya as she slept peacefully, unaware of the milestone awaiting her. All of us, in our own way. And for the first time, I truly believed it. The next morning, as I handed Maya to James for her first overnight visit, I didn't feel the wrenching loss I had anticipated. Instead, I felt an unexpected sense of accomplishment, not just for Maya, who was confident enough in both our loves to transition between homes, but for myself and even for James. We had transformed a painful ending into a different kind of beginning. Not the family we had once planned, but a family nonetheless, redefined, rebuilt, and ultimately resilient in ways we had never imagined possible. As I watched them drive away, Maya waving excitedly from her car seat, I knew with absolute certainty that sometimes our greatest strength emerges not from avoiding heartbreak, but from learning to rebuild after it, not into a replica of what was lost, but into something new and perhaps even stronger than before. Camera opens on Olivia in her office focused on paperwork, a framed photo of Maya visible on her desk. They say time reveals truth, but what they don't mention is that time also transforms it. What once seemed absolute becomes nuanced. Black, and white blur into shades of gray. And sometimes the story you've been telling yourself shifts into something more complex but ultimately more authentic. 2 years had passed since Maya's first overnight stay with James. She was now 3.5, a whirlwind of opinions, creativity, and boundless energy. Our co-parenting routine had stabilized into something that worked surprisingly well. Maya spent every other weekend with James, Wednesday evenings for dinner, and we alternated major holidays. During summer, we adjusted the schedule to give him longer stretches, allowing for short trips to visit his parents or explore nearby attractions. I had been promoted to senior partner at my firm, specializing in family law with a particular focus on collaborative divorce, helping couples navigate separation with minimal trauma to their children. My own experience had become a powerful tool, both professionally and personally. "Ms. Mitchell?" My assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your 3 o'clock is here." "Send her in, please," I replied, closing the file I'd been reviewing. The door opened to reveal a young woman, perhaps 25, clutching a toddler to her chest. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her posture defensive. "Allison, right?" I smiled warmly, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "And who's this little one?" "Carter," she murmured, settling the drowsy child on her lap. "He's 18 months. "Thank you for coming in today," I said, moving to the conversation area with its more comfortable seating. "Would Carter like some toys while we talk? I keep a basket for my clients' children." She nodded gratefully, and I brought over a collection of quiet toys. Once Carter was contentedly exploring a soft puzzle, Allison seemed to relax marginally. "My friend Zoe referred me," she began. "She said you would understand." "Tell me what's happening," I encouraged gently. The story poured out, of her in broken sentences. A husband who had cheated during her difficult pregnancy, who had missed their son's birth because he was with another woman, who now wanted shared custody despite his previous disinterest in parenting. "I can't let him have my baby," she concluded, tears streaming down her face. "Not after what he did. But everyone says I'm being vindictive, that I'll regret keeping Carter from his father. The parallels to my own story were unmistakable. 3 years ago, I would have instantly validated her anger, encouraged the firmest possible boundaries, supported her instinct to protect her child from someone who had proven untrustworthy. Today, my perspective was more layered. "Allison," I said carefully, "I understand your feelings more than you might realize. I've been exactly where you are." I shared the outline of my story: Maya's birth, James's betrayal, my initial determination to keep him at a distance, and the gradual, carefully monitored journey toward functional co-parenting. "But my husband doesn't deserve a second chance," she insisted. "He hasn't even apologized properly." "This isn't about what he deserves," I explained, the wisdom hard-won from my own experience. "It's about what Carter deserves and what will ultimately bring you peace." We talked for nearly 2 hours, well beyond our scheduled appointment. I explained the concept of parallel parenting, a structured approach for high-conflict situations where direct interaction is minimized but both parents remain involved. I outlined legal options that would protect her authority while allowing supervised access that could potentially expand if her ex-husband demonstrated reliability. "The hardest truth I had to learn," I told her as our session concluded, was that holding on to anger, however justified, was limiting my own freedom. Creating a system where Maya could safely have a relationship with her father actually liberated me to focus on rebuilding my own life. After Allison left, looking marginally more hopeful than when she'd arrived, I found myself reflecting on how far I'd come since those raw early days. The rage that had once fueled me had transformed into something more productive: empathy for others navigating similar paths, and wisdom about the complex, imperfect reality of human relationships. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "Maya, insisting on wearing her astronaut costume to dinner tonight. Just checking if this is a battle worth fighting, or if I should just roll with it." I smiled, typing back, "Definitely roll with it." "She's been obsessed with space all week. The helmet comes off for eating, though." These casual exchanges had become routine, practical, and focused on Maya's well-being. Sometimes I marveled at how we had transformed from bitter adversaries to relatively comfortable co-parents. Not friends exactly, but partners in raising our daughter, the one perfect thing we had created together. That evening, I settled on my sofa with a glass of wine and opened my laptop to review a draft settlement for a particularly contentious divorce case. The doorbell rang unexpectedly, interrupting my concentration. Through the peephole, I saw James's sister Ellie, her expression tight with anxiety. We had maintained a cordial relationship after the separation, occasionally running into each other at Maya's events but never socializing independently. "Ellie?" I opened the door, concern immediately rising. "Is everything okay? Is Maya—" "Maya's fine," she assured me quickly, shifting from foot to foot. "She's with James. Can I come in? I need to talk to you about something." Puzzled, I stepped aside to let her enter. "Of course. Would you like some wine?" "God, yes," she exhaled, following me to the kitchen where I poured her a generous glass. She took a long sip before meeting my eyes. "I'm getting divorced." The announcement shouldn't have surprised me. Ellie and her husband, Brad, had been visibly unhappy at Maya's last birthday party, but the fact that she had come to me certainly did. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. "Are you okay?" Not really, she admitted, voice cracking. Brad's fighting me on everything. The house, the savings, custody arrangements for Liam. I need a lawyer, and everyone says you're the... Besready, I set down my wine glass. Ellie, I can't represent you. You're James's sister. That's a clear conflict of interest. I know, she waved dismissively. I'm not asking you to represent me. I'm asking for advice, guidance. You navigated all this with such dignity. Even when James was being an absolute ass, you never used Maya as a weapon or tried to destroy him completely. You set boundaries, but still created space for him to be a father. Her assessment of my approach struck me as surprisingly insightful. I had never discussed my philosophy with her directly. How do you know all this? Ellie gave a sad smile. James talks about it. A lot, actually. About how you could have crushed him legally but chose not to. How you've taught him what it means to put a child first. He says you're the strongest person he knows. I absorbed this information with a strange flutter in my chest. James and I communicated effectively about Maya, but we rarely discussed our perspectives on our shared history. Hearing that he spoke about me with respect to his family was unexpectedly affecting. I can recommend several excellent attorneys, I offered, redirecting the conversation. And I'm happy to talk through general principles that might help make the process less traumatic for Liam. We spent the next hour discussing collaborative approaches to divorce, ways to shield children from conflict, and strategies for maintaining perspective during emotionally charged negotiations. By the time she left, Ellie seemed calmer, armed, with referrals and practical advice. Thank you, she said at the door, for everything. Not just tonight, but for how you've handled things with James. It's meant a lot to our whole family. After she left, I found myself standing in Maya's room, watching her collection of stuffed animals on the bed that would be empty until tomorrow evening when James returned her from their Wednesday dinner. The conversation with Ellie had unsettled something within me, not in an unpleasant way, but like turning over a rock to reveal unexpected life thriving underneath. Had I really been as measured and mature as she described? At the time, every decision had felt like clawing my way through darkness, guided only by my fierce determination to protect Maya while preserving my own dignity. I hadn't been conscious of modeling some noble approach to co-parenting. I had simply been surviving, making the best choices I could with the information available. Yet somehow those instinctive choices had created a foundation for something I never expected. Genuine respect between James and me, and a family structure that, while unconventional, provided Maya with security and love from both parents. The following evening, I waited on the porch for James to return with Maya from their weekly dinner date. My conversation with Ellie lingered in my thoughts, creating a strange anticipation about seeing James, as if I might observe him differently with this new information. His car pulled into the driveway precisely at 7:30, and Maya bounded out the moment he unbuckled her car seat. "Mommy, we saw a real rocket scientist!" she exclaimed, launching herself into my arms in her now wrinkled astronaut costume. "And Daddy got me a space book." "That sounds amazing, sweetheart," I laughed, catching James's eye over her head. He shrugged with a smile. "The Science Museum had a special exhibition," he explained. She was enthralled. "The lady scientist said girls can drive spaceships too," Maya continued, wriggling out of my arms to retrieve her new book from James. "And Daddy said I can be anything I want when I grow up." "He's absolutely right about that," I agreed, accepting the illustrated astronomy book Maya proudly displayed. This looks perfect for our bedtime reading tonight. As Maya darted inside to put her new treasure on her bookshelf, James and I were left in one of those brief, awkward moments that still occasionally surfaced between us. Ellie came by last. "Night," I said, breaking the silence. His expression shifted to concern. "She told you about the divorce?" I nodded. "She wanted advice." "I'm sorry if that put you in an uncomfortable position," he said quickly. "I had no idea she was planning to approach you." "It's fine," I assured him. "I gave her some referrals and general guidance. She seems to be handling things as well as can be expected." He exhaled slowly. "This sounds terrible, but watching her marriage implode has made me reflect even more on how badly I handled ours." The direct reference to our shared past startled me. We typically maintained an unspoken agreement to focus conversations on Maya and current logistics, rarely venturing into the emotional territory of our history. "Brad's making all the same mistakes I did," he continued, gaze fixed on the horizon, rather than meeting my eyes. "Taking the adversarial approach, viewing divorce as a competition to be won rather than a transition to be managed. Meanwhile, Ellie's trying to shield Liam from the conflict, just like you did with Maya." The parallelism wasn't lost on me. "Different circumstances, though," I pointed out gently. "You and I weren't dealing with a gradually deteriorating relationship. We had a specific breach of trust." His focus shifted to me then, expression solemn. "Which makes your approach all the more remarkable. You had every right to scorched earth, Olivia. The fact that you didn't." He shook his head slightly. "I don't think I've ever properly acknowledged how much I respect the way you handled everything." The words hung between us, weighted with implications neither of us seemed quite ready to explore. "Maya's waiting for her story," I said finally, nodding toward the house where our daughter was undoubtedly arranging her stuffed animals for the bedtime reading ritual. "Same time next Wednesday?" He nodded, accepting the return to practical matters with visible relief. "I'll text you to confirm. Good night, Olivia." As he drove away, I found myself lingering on the porch for a moment, processing the unexpected turn in our typically functional interaction. James had never acknowledged so directly the choices I'd made in the aftermath of his betrayal. The recognition stirred something complex within me. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps a closing of a chapter that had remained partially open despite all our progress. Inside, Maya was already in pajamas, her new book clutched eagerly to her chest. As we settled into our nightly routine, I felt an overwhelming surge of gratitude. Despite everything, despite the pain and betrayal and reconstructed expectations, we had built something valuable. A little girl secure in the love of both her parents, unencumbered by their complicated history. The following Saturday was my weekend without Maya. These stretches had become precious opportunities for self-renewal, rather than the painful void they had initially represented. I had piano lessons in the morning, lunch with friends, and typically spent Sunday catching up on work or pursuing creative projects that had fallen by the wayside during my early, overwhelming days of single motherhood. I was returning from my piano lesson when my phone rang, James's number flashing on the screen. A flutter of concern immediately rose. He rarely called during his weekends with Maya unless something was wrong. "Is everything okay?" I answered without preamble. "Everything's fine," he assured me quickly. "Maya's great. She's helping my mother bake cookies. Actually, I'm calling because, well, this is going to sound strange, but I need a legal consult." I frowned, pulling into my driveway. "A legal consult?" James, you're a lawyer. Not a family law specialist, he countered. And this is personal. It's about Ellie's situation. I'd rather not go into details over the phone. Would you be willing to meet? Coffee somewhere, maybe. I know it's your free weekend, so I understand if... It's fine, I interrupted, curiosity piqued. The cafe on Maple in an hour? Perfect, thank you. An hour later, I slid into a booth across from James, who already had 2 coffees waiting. Mine, prepared exactly as I preferred it. A detail that surprised me. He looked uncharacteristically nervous, a file folder on the table before him. So, Ellie's situation? I prompted after taking a sip. Right. He nodded, tapping the folder without opening it. Brad's lawyers are arguing that because Ellie's name isn't on the deed to their house, despite the fact that they purchased it during marriage, she has no claim to it in the division of assets. I wanted your perspective on whether this strategy has any merit. I raised an eyebrow. You know perfectly well it doesn't. Marital property laws are clear on assets acquired during marriage, regardless of whose name is on the paperwork. That's what I thought, he agreed, still fidgeting with the folder. I told her not to worry about it, that it's just an aggressive opening position. I studied him carefully. James, you didn't need me to tell you something this basic. What's really going on? He exhaled heavily, finally meeting my gaze. I wanted to talk to you, about us, about the past, and I figured you'd be more likely to agree if I framed it as a professional consultation. A complex swirl of emotions rose within me. Surprise, wariness, curiosity. Why now? After all this time? Partly because of Ellie's situation, he admitted. Watching her struggle has made me reflect on our history in a new light, but mostly because... He hesitated, then pushed the folder toward me. Because of this. I opened it cautiously, unsure what to expect. Inside was a letter, not a legal document as I'd anticipated, but a personal letter, handwritten on quality stationery. I've been working with my therapist on making amends, he explained as I stared at the folded paper. Not just saying sorry, but truly understanding the impact of my actions and taking responsibility in a meaningful way. You don't have to read it now. You don't have to read it ever if you don't want to. But I needed to give it to you. I touched the edge of the letter, feeling the weight of everything it might contain. What does it say? Everything I should have said 3 years ago. An acknowledgement of the pain I caused, not excuses, but context for my actions. Appreciation for how you've handled co-parenting despite every reason to shut me out completely. And some things I've never told you about my journey since then. His vulnerability was disarming. The James who had betrayed me had been defensive, evasive, unwilling to fully own the consequences of his choices. This man sitting across from me seemed fundamentally different, humbled, self-aware, direct. You could have mailed this, I observed, still not unfolding the letter. I wanted to give you the choice of whether to accept it, he replied, and to be available if you had questions after reading it. I slipped the letter into my purse, not yet ready to engage with its contents in a public setting. I'll read it, I promised, but I can't guarantee my response. He nodded, visibly relieved. That's all I ask. Thank you for meeting me, Olivia. As we finished our coffees, the conversation shifted to safer territory. Maya's latest developmental milestones, her growing interest in astronomy, the upcoming parent-teacher conference at her preschool. Yet underlying the familiar co-parenting, dialogue was a new current, a sense of something unresolved yet not entirely unwelcome. That evening, after a long walk to clear my head, I finally sat at my kitchen table and unfolded James's letter. 6 pages of his distinctive handwriting covered the crisp paper, the words clearly chosen with care and consideration. "Olivia," it began, "I've written and rewritten this letter countless times, searching for words adequate to address the harm I caused you and Maya. No such perfect words exist, but my therapist helped me realize that the attempt itself, the willingness to confront my actions directly, is part of the healing process for both of us." What followed was the most complete and honest accounting of his betrayal I had ever received. He described the panic he had felt as my pregnancy progressed, his deep-seated fears about failing as a father based on his own childhood with an emotionally absent father, the way he had used the affair as an escape from responsibilities he wasn't sure he could handle. "None of this excuses what I did," he wrote. "I made choices that hurt you profoundly at a time when you deserved nothing but support and love. I missed the birth of our daughter, a moment I can never reclaim and will regret until my dying day. I betrayed not just our marriage vows, but the fundamental trust that existed between us as partners and friends." He detailed the subsequent months from his perspective, the shame that had initially presented as defensiveness, the gradual recognition of the depth of his failure as both husband and father, the painful process of dismantling his justifications, and facing the reality of the damage he had caused. "When you established those initial boundaries around Maya, I was furious," he admitted in the letter. "I felt entitled to fatherhood despite having already abdicated its responsibilities. It took months of therapy to understand that your restrictions weren't punitive but protective, not just of Maya, but of your own healing process. You created a system where I had to earn trust rather than demanding it, and that system saved me from continuing the cycle of entitlement and irresponsibility that led to my betrayal." The final pages expressed gratitude for the co-parenting relationship we had slowly built, acknowledgement of the extraordinary grace with which I had navigated the situation, and his commitment to continued growth as both a father and a person. "I don't write this seeking forgiveness or reconciliation," he concluded. "Those aren't things I have any right to request. I write simply to acknowledge the truth of our shared history, to take responsibility for my role in it, and to express my profound respect for the way you have risen from the ashes of what I destroyed. Maya will grow up understanding what real strength looks like because of your example." By the time I finished reading, tears streamed silently down my face, not from reopened wounds, but from the unexpected relief of having my experience so completely validated. For years, I had carried not just the pain of betrayal, but the weight of wondering if I had somehow contributed to it, if my boundaries had been too harsh, if my narrative was entirely accurate. James's letter offered what I hadn't known I needed: external confirmation of my internal truth. The recognition that despite the complexity of human relationships and the subjectivity of personal perspective, some things were objectively, undeniably wrong. He had wronged me. He knew it. And he was finally able to articulate it without qualification or deflection. I didn't immediately respond to the letter. Instead, I placed it in the cedar chest where I kept Maya's milestone mementos and important documents. Whatever happened next, it represented a significant marker in our complicated journey. Not an eraser of the past, but an acknowledgement that would allow us both to move forward with greater authenticity. The following week proceeded normally on the surface. James returned Maya on Sunday evening as usual. We exchanged typical texts about her schedule and needs. Neither of us referenced the letter or our cafe meeting. Yet I sensed a subtle shift. In our interactions, a layer of tension had dissolved, replaced by something not quite definable but undeniably different. At Maya's preschool parent-teacher conference that Friday, we sat side by side as her teacher, Ms. Chen, enthusiastically described our daughter's progress. Maya has exceptional verbal skills for her age, she noted, showing us a story Maya had dictated about a girl astronaut. And she's very comfortable expressing her emotions, which isn't always common in 3-year-olds. She told me, "My mommy and daddy live in different houses, but they both love me super a lot." James and I exchanged glances, a moment of shared pride in the resilient, confident little person we were raising despite our broken beginning. She also mentioned that sometimes she wishes you lived in the same house, Ms. Chen added carefully. But she immediately followed up by saying, "But it's okay because they're still friends. Friends." The word hung between us as we walked to the parking lot afterward, loaded with implications neither of us had considered. "I didn't realize she saw us that way," James said finally, breaking the contemplative silence. "Children categorize relationships simply," I replied. "In her mind, if we're not fighting and we sometimes laugh together, that equals friendship." He nodded thoughtfully. "It's not the worst perception she could have, I suppose." "No," I agreed, reaching my car. "It's not." As I unlocked my door, James cleared his throat. "I don't want to presume anything, Olivia, but I was wondering if you'd be open to a more integrated approach to some aspects of co-parenting. Things like jointly attending Maya's activities, or occasionally having family dinners so she sees us functioning comfortably together. Studies show it can be beneficial for children to see divorced parents modeling positive interaction. The proposal was reasonable, focused on Maya's well-being rather than any personal agenda. Yet it represented a significant evolution from our carefully separated parenting approach. "I'd need to think about it," I said honestly. "It's taken a lot of work to establish these boundaries." "Of course," he replied quickly. "Take all the time you need, and if you're not comfortable with it, I completely understand." As he turned to leave, I found myself calling after him. "James?" He paused, looking back expectantly. "I read your letter." His expression softened. "Thank you for telling me." I searched for the right words. "It helped to hear your perspective, to know that your understanding of what happened aligns with mine." He nodded, a complicated mix of emotions crossing his features. I meant every word. We stood there for a moment, the evening air cool around us, 3 years of history stretched between us like an invisible thread, tangled and frayed, but not entirely broken. "Maybe we could try a family dinner," I suggested, surprising myself. "Just once, as an experiment, to see how it affects Maya." The smile that spread across his face was genuine, touched with both hope and caution. "I'd like that. Just tell me when." As I drove home alone, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. From the devastating betrayal during childbirth to this tentative step toward a more collaborative future, the path had been neither linear nor easy. Yet somehow, through painful growth and careful boundaries, we had created something neither of us could have imagined in those dark early days, a foundation of mutual respect that might eventually deserve the simple label Maya had already assigned it: friendship. Not because the past was forgotten or the betrayal diminished, but because healing, real, substantive healing, had allowed us both to evolve beyond the worst moments of our shared history. As I pulled into my driveway, I felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. Not completion or resolution, but something equally valuable. The recognition that life's most painful chapters don't necessarily determine the entire story. That with courage, boundaries, and genuine effort, even the most broken beginnings can transform into something unexpectedly meaningful. Maya deserved nothing less, and perhaps, after everything, so did I. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.